You're a Bentley right now. I'm just gonna put spinners on that thing. I need you lower! Bam! Hit it! Oh, straighten your arm. Oh, that's mine. That's mine. Yeah! I mean, come on, you already know.
Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well, it's time for a 2020 Georgia Bulldogs football schedule preview. This isn't going to be a prediction video in terms of record or wins and losses or anything like that. We're just going to take an early look at the 2020 schedule, compare it to 2019. Is this year's schedule harder, easier? What about the road games, non-con, those kinds of things? We're going to take a look at that in today's video. Subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Some of them are even watchable. Yes, I'm a Georgia fan, but I'm a college football fan. Georgia just happens to be my favorite team. I talk about and cover college football from all conferences, coast to coast. I talk about all the teams. I love college football, but I'm not going to try to hide the fact that I'm a Georgia fan. But anyway, let's get started with this schedule preview and that. All right, we'll start things off by putting the 2019 schedule up on the screen real quick, just so we have a reference point to go off of when we're comparing the 2020 schedule. There it is, 2019. Now, these are regular season previews. Clearly, we don't know what's going to happen in the postseason for 2020, so I'm not going to talk a lot about last year's postseason. But regular season, of course, Georgia went 11-1, third season in a row. They've gone 11-1 in the regular season. And the third year in a row that they've won the division. Can they repeat in 2020? I don't know. We'll find out once the season starts. Of course, this is Kirby Smart's fifth year now at the University of Georgia, starting in 2016, right? Went 7-5 in the regular season his first year, 8-5 after a bowl win. Year two, 2017, 11-1 in the regular season, 13-2, losing in the national title game. Third season, 2018, 11-1 again in the regular season, and then losing in the Sugar Bowl to Texas. And then 2019, 11-1 in the regular season, losing in the SEC championship game and beating Baylor in the Sugar Bowl to finish with 12 wins. So regular season win totals, 7, 11, 11, 11. That's how it's gone so far. Can they do it again in 2020? We'll find out. What happened in 2019? Well, like I mentioned, 11-1 in the regular season, with the only loss coming at home to South Carolina. So they were able to get through the rest of their schedule. Started out at Vandy, won that game fairly easily. I was concerned with the offense from that game forward, though. If you go back and rewatch that game, Georgia scored 0 touchdowns in the second half of that game. The only points they got was a field goal. I think they ended up winning something like 30-3. But I think it was 27-3 at halftime or something. That might not be the exact score, but it was somewhere close to that. I know for a fact we didn't score in the second half, and that's when I really started to have some concerns about the offense. But then Murray State and Arkansas State, two lower classification schools, blew both of them out in the non-con. Then there was the big non-con matchup that a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about in the offseason, the Georgia-Notre Dame game in Athens, sort of round two of that game from a couple of years ago when we played in South Bend and beat them up there. I believe it was 20-17. We beat them in Notre Dame a couple of seasons ago, beat them 23-17 last season in Athens. So Georgia undefeated against the Golden Domers. Yep, sorry for your troubles there. 3-0 now, I think it is. Then we had our first bye week of the season, 2 bye weeks last year. That's not the case for 2020, as we'll see in a minute. First bye week, come out of that. Road game at Tennessee, 43-14. One of the best offensive games we played all year, at least in terms of points scored. We scored more points against them than we did any other Power 5 opponent. Then you came back home, or we came back home for a couple of home games, South Carolina and Kentucky, and of course we lost the South Carolina game. Georgia played one of the worst games I've seen them play in a long, long time. Probably played worse than any of the 5 losses they had in 2016 in Kirby's first year. We have 4 offensive turnovers in that game, all 4 committed by Jake Fromm, 3 interceptions and a fumble. Defensively, we played great. We only gave up 1 touchdown defensively in that game to South Carolina and lost. That's hard to do. The offense just played terrible. Rodrigo missed a couple of field goals, which he never does. It was just a weird sort of game. Not taking anything away from South Carolina. It was a big win for them, but Georgia just played absolutely horrible. Lost at home to a really bad South Carolina team, 17. And by that point in the season, everybody in America was aware of Georgia's offensive troubles. Rebounded the following week against Kentucky, sort of. Offense played bad again, but we won. Second bye week heading into the Florida game where we won 24-17. Probably Fromm's best game of the season. You come out of that, Mizzou at home, handled them. We've only lost to them one time since they joined the SEC. Went on the road and beat Auburn.
What do you think about having to play Georgia at the end of the year?
No, that's not fair. Yeah, of course it's not fair. Wait till when you see the 2020 schedule, you go, why aren't you playing Auburn at the end of the year like you've been doing for 100 years? Well, because it's not fair, according to the Barner. Beat Texas A&M at home and then close things out in the regular season on the road with a win at Georgia Tech. So that's how it went in 2019. Undefeated in the non-con, undefeated on the road, and the only loss coming at home to South Carolina. Went over Florida in a neutral site game in Jacksonville. All right, here's the 2020 schedule. How does it compare? Harder, easier, the same? What about the road games, non-con? Well, we start things off this season with a neutral site game in Atlanta. This is a Monday game, the Labor Day game. They have one game every Monday, the weekend that college football starts, a neutral site game. This year, Georgia versus Virginia, Monday night, Labor Day in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Dome. I think it's the Chick-fil-A Kickoff Classic or whatever they're pretending to call it nowadays. I hate these games. It's getting ridiculous with these neutral site games. I'm doing North Carolina here coming up probably later today. They have a neutral site game in week 2. What are we doing? Play these games home and home. I mean, this is just insane, the number of neutral site games now. But anyway, start things off, neutral site game against Virginia. Kirby's first year, we started off in this same game here, but against North Carolina. Georgia won a close one. I expect Georgia to win this game. Virginia's a decent team in the ACC. They lose a lot of pieces offensively. They get a lot of pieces back defensively. I was high on Virginia last year, especially defensively. They will hit you, Virginia. They don't play defense like an ACC team. They play defense like an SEC team. Not trying to say they're as talented as some of the upper tier SEC teams, but they're very nasty on defense. They lose Bryce Perkins on offense, which is great news for me and Georgia fans. He's a dynamic playmaking QB who gives a lot of teams trouble. He's gone, so they got to find a replacement for him as well as several other key players on offense. Rocco Mendenhall's done a good job there at Virginia, but this is a game Georgia should win. And if Georgia wants to go where they think they can go, they need to win this game convincingly. If you can't beat Virginia by more than a touchdown, chances are you need to lower expectations for season goals. I'm not knocking Virginia. Like I said, I think they're a pretty good team. They're not a top 10 team, though. And if Georgia wants to be a top 10, a top 5, a playoff contending team, they should handle Virginia fairly easily. Then you get a non-con ETSU at home. Should blow them out. Nice warm-up game before that week 3 matchup on the road at Alabama.
Hey, pull your pants up. Damn. Hey, break down. Sit, give it to me. Bow. Bow. Go set. Ready. Stop, drop. Get down. Yeah. Go set. I got a bus in the back, too. Let's roll, man. Let's roll. Hustle, man. Hustle. Oh, yeah. Got the dancing bag. Get you some. Did you have cereal this morning? Let it out. Let it out. Live for the past.
Oh, my God. This Scott Cochran got me ready to run through a damn wall.
Push him back, way back.
Of course, the big news breaking yesterday, Georgia gets Scott Cochran from Alabama. How big of a deal is this? I'm not real sure, to be honest. I mean, if you're one of these people who believes that the whole like football is a game of inches type thing, then maybe the Scott Cochran hire can make a big difference. I'm a Scott Cochran fan, and I remember when we hired Kirby Smart, and even in the years following, as teams have come into Alabama and poached different coaches, coordinators, whatever, from Alabama, a lot of Alabama fans in this comment section, on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere, Alabama fans I know in real life have told me one thing about Scott Cochran. These teams can come and take whoever they want. They better not take Scott Cochran. Law Tide, a guy I've known on here, YouTube, since the day I started. He has gone on and on about Scott Cochran, calls him what does he call him? A monster maker or whatever, turns men into monsters, that kind of thing. He's a motivational guy. Now, he's going to be an on-field position coach with UGA, most likely special teams is what I'm hearing. At Alabama, he was their strength and conditioning coordinator. clearly he can still have some impact in that area at the University of Georgia, but he was looking to move into an on-field coaching position, and Kirby Smart was able to go in and make that hire. I do think it's a pretty big deal for the University of Georgia. You come out of that game at Bama, which is going to be absolutely brutal. Kirby has struggled on the road against SEC West teams. That's no secret. He finally got a win last year for his first win on the road against the SEC West. So he's now 1-3 against the SEC West on the road. That's the toughest game on it. Listen, if Alabama's on your schedule, that's your toughest game, most likely. It's going to be a tough game. Come out of that one, got to play Louisiana Monroe at home, then Vandy at home, and then the Auburn game at home.
What do you think about having to play Georgia at the end of the year?
No, that's not fair.
The Auburn game has been moved up to the middle of the season, sort of where the Tennessee game used to be versus Georgia. And, of course, if you've been under a rock or you don't know what happened here, several years ago, Auburn started complaining to the SEC office about the back end of their schedule. For years, Auburn's last 3 games of the season have been Georgia, then a nobody, and then Alabama. A few years they've had a bye in between Georgia and Alabama, but there's been, the last 3 weeks of the season they've played Georgia and then either a bye or a nobody and then Alabama. They were complaining about that. It wasn't fair, blah, 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 on and on and on. They finally got the SEC office and the University of Georgia to agree to move the game. The game has been moved. This is where it is. We played them at home this year. Georgia has owned Auburn. Auburn has a better record against Alabama in the last 12 years than they do against Georgia. So this idea that, by moving the Georgia game, suddenly Auburn's going to flip some kind of a switch, I just think is a little ridiculous. What are we, like 12-3 against Auburn in the last 15 games? Something like that. We've just owned them. It doesn't matter when on the schedule we play Auburn. This is kind of silly that they made such a big deal about it, but they got their way. The game has been moved up. Then we go on the road and play Missouri. Like I mentioned before, they've only beat us one time in the last 8 or 9 years, whatever it's been since the SEC expanded. We do have to play them there. We'll see. I don't have very high hopes or expectations from Mizzou this year. Maybe they end up being a surprise team, but of course they had the one and done deal with Kelly Bryant last year, so they'll have a new QB this year. Now, Kelly Bryant was injured a little last year, so they played several quarterbacks. So maybe the quarterback they end up going with is one that does have some experience, but still don't think it'll be on the level of a Kelly Bryant. We'll see. Then we get our bye week, our annual bye week before the Florida game. That'll be a huge game too. I think probably the winner of that game is going to win the East. And to be honest, I don't really see a way that Georgia can lose that game to Florida and still win the East because of that Alabama game earlier in the year. I know Florida also plays LSU, but, so fine. Maybe Florida loses to LSU. Maybe Georgia loses to Bama. That Florida-Georgia game becomes basically an SEC East title game. If we lose to Florida, we will, Florida's going to have to lose then 2 games, right? And if we lose to Bama and Florida, then Florida would have to lose 3 games. Not likely, in my opinion. So I think that's a huge game, clearly, Georgia and Florida. Then we finish up with 4 games, 3 conference games and a non-con to close out the season, 2 home and 2 away. We travel to Columbia to play South Carolina, which will be a revenge game from last year. South Carolina was a terrible team last year. Weird things happen sometimes in college football. Unfortunately for me, it happened to my Georgia Bulldogs last year, but we've seen things like this happen before. Ohio State getting blown out by Iowa. North Carolina almost beat Clemson. You just see some weird things. Unfortunately, it happened to my Georgia Bulldogs last year. That does not mean South Carolina was a good team. I mean, they were terrible. I don't think they're going to be that much better this year. They actually may be a little bit better this year, but I think their record's probably going to be similar to what it was last year. Their schedule is brutal again. But we played them in Columbia. Then we come home and play Tennessee. That's the game that's sort of been flip-flopped with Auburn. So weird place to see Tennessee here. Play them at home. I do think Tennessee is improving, but, we have to be realistic about that. They lost to BYU. They lost to Georgia State. Yeah, they won their last 5 games or whatever it was, including a bowl game. And yes, they're improving. But when you're in the 5 to 7 win range for basically the last 12 years, it's not that hard to improve. I don't think Tennessee is anywhere near a top 10 or top 15 team, and Georgia should handle them without a problem. At home, we'll see. On the road at Kentucky, and then home against Georgia Tech to close things out. Of course, we always play Georgia Tech, the in-state rival, the end of the year. So 4 non-con games per usual, 2 Power 5 opponents, 2 lower classification opponents, ETSU and ULM, Louisiana Monroe. Power 5 opponents, Georgia Tech at home to close the season, Virginia in a neutral site game to open up the season. Compare that to 2019 when we played Notre Dame and Georgia Tech and 2 nobodies. The non-con schedule, probably a little bit easier this year. Virginia, not as good as Notre Dame, in my opinion. So the non-con schedule, probably a little bit easier. Maybe Georgia Tech's a little bit better in 2020 than they were in 2019, but our offense was horrible last year and we hung half 100 on them, beat them 52-7. Even if they cut that in half, okay, maybe we win 35-14 this year. I'm just not a believer in Georgia Tech yet. Sorry. ETSU and ULM, Murray State and Arkansas State last year, that's a wash. So non-con a little bit easier, I think, in 2020. Now, the rest of the schedule, or at least the road schedule, a little bit harder, at least in the fact that we have to play at Bama. Last year, our draw from the SEC West was Texas A&M. They're not on Alabama's level, and we played them in Athens. So we flipped a home game with Texas A&M from last year to now a road game at Alabama in 2020. That's clearly more difficult, right? Now, we also get some easier road games this year. Last year, we had to play at Tennessee and at Auburn. This year, we get Auburn and Tennessee both at home. 2 teams that I think will be pretty good teams. Auburn, I think, will be a top 10 to 15 team. I think Tennessee has a chance to be close to a top 25 team this year. So getting them at home, I think, is okay. Mizzou, doesn't matter to me whether we play them home or on the road. So playing at Mizzou, no big deal. Playing at South Carolina, sorry, no big deal. You can type all you want about the fact that they beat us last year. It means nothing. They're a terrible team. And then at Kentucky, I don't really know what to make of Kentucky other than I know that they're not as good as Georgia. And Georgia's likely going to win that game, and it likely won't be that close. So outside of the Alabama game, I think Georgia's road schedule is easier in 2020 than it was in 2019. Overall, I'm going to have to say the schedule is a little bit harder because I think Florida is as good or perhaps a little bit better than they were last year. I think Auburn is going to be better offensively than they were last year. Defensively, some question marks, losing a lot of talent to the NFL. Tennessee, I think, is going to be better than last year. We have to play Alabama on the road as opposed to Texas A&M at home. Getting Virginia instead of Notre Dame is maybe a little bit easier, but overall, I think the 2020 schedule is a little bit more difficult for Georgia. We're going to be breaking in a new quarterback to start the year, and we don't even know who it's going to be. They better get it figured out before week 3 when they travel to Tuscaloosa, though. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Really appreciate you watching. That's the 2020 football schedule for the University of Georgia Bulldogs. Don't forget to troll me down below about how we're probably going 5-7. Type 1980 down there a bunch of times, and please pretend that unless you win a national title, you're not any good. Please keep pretending that. Have a good morning.
Bob, stop raking in the garage.